Listen to the story of the prodigal son and learn what God's treasure is and yours. This son of a loving father left his home and thought he squandered everything for nothing of any value, though he did not know its worthlessness at the time. But when he came home, the father welcomed him with joy, because only the son himself was his father's treasure. He wanted nothing else. That was an excerpt from Chapter 8 of A Course in Miracles. Hi, welcome to the second episode of Once Upon a Dream. In this episode, we'll be discussing the themes of A Course in Miracles through the lens of the children's story, Pinocchio. And so why am I doing this through children's stories? Well, many people find the text of A Course in Miracles challenging to understand. But when we look at the perennial themes of the Course through the structure of a children's story, it can both simplify and facilitate our understanding. And even if you haven't read the book Pinocchio or seen the movie adaptations of the story, you may still be familiar with the basic idea of the story as it's so well known. And basically it's about a boy puppet who can talk and move without the aid of a ventriloquist and whose dream is to become a real human boy. And of course, everybody will be familiar with the image or the idea of Pinocchio's nose growing when he tells a lie. I think the story is perfect for exploring the themes of the Course, and we're going to be particularly looking at the themes of the role of the Holy Spirit, self-honesty, temptation, and awakening or resurrection. But we'll be using the Pinocchio story as a metaphor or allegory or lens through which to explore the themes of the Course. So the original story, The Adventures of Pinocchio, first serialized in an Italian children's magazine in 1881, was written by Carlo Collodi, and it was originally a pretty gruesome tale. For example, Pinocchio kills the talking cricket, then he gets his feet burnt off, and then Pinocchio is eventually hanged or left for dead. But that's not the version of Pinocchio we'll be looking at in this video. Pinocchio was later published as a children's novel, and there have been several movie adaptations since then. Another one will be out this year, 2022, starring Tom Hanks as Geppetto, the woodcarver. But in this episode, we'll be looking at the famous 1940 Disney version of this story. It's still a pretty dark version with child abductors lurking on every corner, but at least the cricket lives. The movie opens with Jiminy Cricket singing the famous tune, "When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are," etc. The sentiment of this song is a little reminiscent of one of the first lines of the Course. There is no order of difficulty in miracles. The Course says the first thing to remember about miracles is that there's no order of difficulty among them. One miracle is not harder or bigger than another. They are all the same. When the cricket finishes his song, he says, "Pretty, ain't it? But I bet a lot of you folks don't believe that." Meaning a lot of us won't believe that wishing on a star will make our dreams come true. And I think it's a little bit how many of us feel when we read that there's no order of difficulty in miracles and that one is not more spectacular than the other, and that they're all the same. It might sound very unrealistic, the stuff of fairy tales perhaps. But let's continue with this fairy tale. Geppetto the woodcarver has made a little boy puppet out of wood, and before he goes to sleep that night, he says a prayer to one of the stars in the night sky, wanting to will his creation to life. Because Geppetto is a good man who has given much happiness and kindness to others, he receives the first half of his miracle. The Course's definition of a miracle is an expression of love that has a healing outcome. Because Geppetto has expressed love to others, an expression of love in the form of the gift of companionship is now on its way to him. As Geppetto sleeps, the star comes to life in the form of a blue fairy called Leona, and she brings the puppet that Geppetto has made to life. She tells the puppet, "Wake, the gift of life is thine." However, although the puppet has come to life, he's not yet human. This part of the miracle is up to Pinocchio. The blue fairy tells Pinocchio, "To make Geppetto's wish come true will be entirely up to you. Prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish, and someday you will be a real boy." Now, in our analogy here, Pinocchio becoming a real boy is a metaphor for anyone in any spiritual tradition, or from no spiritual tradition, waking up to their true nature, their true divinity, their real self. So, in our symbolism, the real boy means the real self, and the real self means the self that God created. Now, some people may get confused and think that the real self is just a better version of your personality, your best self, or the best version of yourself, as some people call it. But this is not what the real self means in A Course in Miracles. The real self is not a separate personality. The real self is the one self that is pure light and love, the unified spirit. And it is this unified spirit that A Course in Miracles refers to as the Son of God in its clarification of terms. The Son, in this context, is not a human being. The Son is creation. It is the singular expression of the divine that can be expressed in an infinite number of ways. When the Course tells us to repeat phrases like, "I am the light of the world," it's not talking about our human body or our human personality being the light of the world. Not John Smith the lawyer or Mary Bloggs the nurse. It's talking about what you were before you became John Smith the lawyer or Mary Bloggs the nurse. Also remember Workbook Lesson 67, which is entitled, "Love Created Me Like Itself." We make our self-images, reconstruct our personalities, and these may change. These are transitory, but the real self is changeless. The second point to make about the fairy statement, which I remind you is, to make Geppetto's wish come true will be entirely up to you. Prove yourself brave, truthful, and selfish, and someday you'll be a real boy. So she says it's entirely up to Pinocchio, and this reminds me of Workbook Lesson 70. My salvation comes from me. This lesson says, nothing outside yourself can save you. Nothing outside yourself can give you peace. Your salvation comes from you. Salvation means transcendence or freedom from the limitations of the human condition. No more strings to hold us down. And again, another reminder, salvation doesn't come from you, John Smith, or Mary Bloggs, or whatever your given name might be. Salvation comes from the real you, the light that came into being before there was a John Smith or a Mary Bloggs. It's this light that is the you where salvation comes from, because ultimately John Smith and Mary Bloggs don't actually exist. The Creator has given us life. We are life itself, dreaming that we are human, dreaming that we are John Smith or Mary Bloggs or Pinocchio. We are the puppets, but we are also our own puppet masters. Like Pinocchio, it's up to us to realize or remember our true nature. Here is a quote from a book by David Morehouse. It's a book about remote viewing and nothing to do with A Course in Miracles, but this quote perfectly describes the real self. Morehouse says, "In a world blatantly filled with screams of limitation, where others make every effort to define your reality, I need you to know that you are omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, and eternal, a magnificent being existing in a finite condition. Pinocchio asks Leona, "How do I become a real boy?" She replies, "You must listen to your conscience." "What's a conscience?" asks Pinocchio. At this point, Jiminy Cricket chimes in and says, "The conscience is that still, small voice within that nobody ever listens to." And this is pretty much the definition of the Holy Spirit in A Course in Miracles. In the Course, the Holy Spirit is described as a voice that has been given to us by God as a guide. This voice is described as our internal teacher. This is our inner compass, our inner tutor, our inner tuition, or intuition. And in the preface of the Course, it says that the only purpose of the Course is to provide a way in which some people will be able to find their own internal teacher. In the original transcript of A Course in Miracles, Jesus says, "The Holy Spirit is nothing more than your own right mind. It was also mine." Jesus also says, "That is why you can choose to listen to two voices within you. One you made yourself, and that voice is not of God. But the other voice is given to you by God, who asks you only to listen to it." It is possible, even in this world, to hear only that voice and no other. It takes effort and great willingness to learn. It is the final lesson that I learned. He also says, "When you willed to leave your source gave you a voice to speak for him, because he could no longer share his knowledge with you without hindrance. Direct communication was broken because you had made another voice through another will." This other voice that we made is the voice that we usually hear in our head. It creates a narrative for us to believe in. It tells us who to blame for what's going wrong in our lives. This voice judges us and switches from insulting and belittling us to being really grandiose and bombastic, making us feel special and superior to others. This other voice is always tempting us or encouraging us to feel sorry for ourselves. In A Course in Miracles, this other, contradictory, changeable voice is referred to as the ego. The ego is the Holy Spirit's rival for our attention. Jesus also says, "The voice of the Holy Spirit does not command because it is incapable of arrogance. It does not demand because it does not seek control. It does not overcome because it does not attack." The voice of the Holy Spirit merely reminds. It is compelling only because of what it reminds you of. The voice of the Holy Spirit brings to your mind the other way, remaining quiet, even in the midst of the turmoil you've made for yourselves. The voice for God is always quiet because it speaks of peace. The fairy assigns Jiminy Cricket the role of being Pinocchio's conscience, or voice for truth, the still small voice within. So this is Jiminy Cricket's function in the plan for the completion of Geppetto's miracle. She dubs Jiminy Cricket Pinocchio's conscience, Lord High Keeper of the knowledge of right and wrong, counselor in moments of temptation, and guide along the straight and narrow path. The Keeper of the knowledge of right and wrong, that title reminds me of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil in the Garden of Eden, which is particularly relevant given the theme of temptation in Pinocchio's story. The fairy's parting words to Pinocchio are, "Always let your conscience be your guide." And in A Course in Miracles, we are continually encouraged to turn to the Holy Spirit first for guidance in all things. And if we temporarily forget to ask for guidance and temporarily lose our way, we can always choose again. When Geppetto wakes up, Pinocchio explains that the blue fairy has brought him to life, given him a conscience, which is our symbol for the Holy Spirit, and also says that someday he'll be a real boy, or to use our language, one day he'll realize his true nature and know his real self to be peace, love, and joy. As we noted earlier, the course states that the voice of the Holy Spirit merely reminds, it doesn't command. So, Jiminy Cricket gives Pinocchio a reminder to ask for advice in the form of the song, Give a Little Whistle. In other words, call on the Holy Spirit when you don't know what to do for the best. So, I'm not going to sing the song myself, but here are the very pertinent lyrics. When you get in trouble and you don't know right from wrong, give a little whistle. When you meet temptation and the urge is very strong, give a little whistle. Take the straight and narrow path, and if you start to slide, give a little whistle. Give a little whistle. And always let your conscience be your guide. That was a sort of rap type version of it. But, as with all the best children's stories, poor old Pinocchio immediately runs into temptation and ignores the recommendations of his conscience. He starts off with the best of intentions, wanting to go to school, but on his way he encounters the ironically named Honest John and his sidekick, Gideon. The voice of the ego is very persuasive. It suggests, insinuates, offers, hints, wheedles, ingratiates, when it's trying to distract us or lure us away from our path and purpose and best intention. So, Honest John lures Pinocchio away from even starting school by telling him that he should have a career in show business instead. Because, why not? It's great to be a celebrity, an actor's life for me, sings Honest John. Jiminy Cricket advises Pinocchio not to go with Honest John, but to politely decline his offer and continue his journey to school. Pinocchio merrily ignores his conscience and marches off with Honest John. We next see Pinocchio performing on stage. A star is born, no pun intended. I've got no strings to hold me down, to make me smile, to make me frown. There are no strings on me, sings Pinocchio, I'm free. Or so he thinks. Shortly, he will be placed in a cage by the director of the theatre. In the meantime, Jiminy Cricket feels a bit redundant. He seems to give up after Pinocchio appears to have success on the stage. However, we know that the Holy Spirit has infinite patience and never gives up on us, no matter how many times we get tempted by shiny objects and distracted by the lure of fame, fortune, or whatever. Whilst Jiminy Cricket is temporarily out of action, the theatre owner is plotting to exploit Pinocchio on a global tour, and then when Pinocchio is worn out and old, the theatre owner says Pinocchio would make good firewood. So when you don't listen to your conscience, inner guidance, Holy Spirit, things can go horribly wrong. The Blue Fairy comes to his rescue after she catches him out telling a few lies. And she says, You see, Pinocchio, a lie keeps growing and growing until it's as plain as the nose on your face. So we can't really lie to others without lying to ourselves as well. But Pinocchio falls into trouble almost immediately. Since he has escaped from the wicked theatre owner, he has another encounter with Honest John, who has been liaising with another sinister character who is an abductor of young boys. Very creepy. Pinocchio is then lured to a place called Pleasure Island, a place where they say stupid, disobedient little boys are taken. At Pleasure Island, bad behaviour is normalised. The boys are encouraged to smash things up, smoke cigars, and generally behave badly. So when we're being tempted, everything is normalised and made to look not so bad. Being bad is a lot of fun, ain't it? Says Pinocchio to his new friend, Lampwick, who has just defaced a picture of the Mona Lisa and smashed the stained glass window. Fortunately, Jiminy Cricket is still on the case and soon discovers that the boys have been lured to Pleasure Island so that they can be turned into donkeys and presumably sold. This part of the film is sometimes seen as a metaphor for human trafficking, grooming, and other nasty forms of child exploitation. Before Jiminy gets a chance to warn Pinocchio, Lamprick starts to gradually turn into a donkey before Pinocchio's eyes. It actually becomes quite a disturbing scene when the boy Lamprick realizes what is happening to him. Pinocchio escapes Pleasure Island, but not before starting his own slight donkey-type transformation. So, all thoughts we have, all decisions we make, all our ideas have consequences, effects, and manifest in some form or another. This is another course theme which stresses that our behavior originates from our thoughts and our ideas. The seeds that we plant in our mind bear fruit in the events and the circumstances of our lives. Pinocchio escapes from this danger, but his adventures continue in a rather complicated fashion. But to cut a long story short, he finds out that Geppetto has gone in search of him. Pinocchio eventually then finds Geppetto in the belly of a whale, don't ask, and then he rescues him, but in the act of rescuing Geppetto, Pinocchio himself seems to die. Geppetto brings Pinocchio's body home and is so distraught that he doesn't notice when Pinocchio undergoes a resurrection. The course describes our resurrection as our awakening, and symbolically that's what happens to Pinocchio here. His bravery towards Geppetto is rewarded and he is brought back to life. The course tells us that we too will awaken from our dream of hell when we help someone else to wake up. We help someone else to wake up through extending to them love, the source of that love being God. Pinocchio asks Geppetto why he's crying. "Because you're dead," replies Geppetto. "But father, I'm alive, see," said Pinocchio. "And I'm a real boy,"